Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Jacob Maxwell, a wealthy real estate mogul, had everything except for peace. One night at LNX restaurant, his past resurfaced when he spotted his ex-wife, Wendy, now radiant and thriving, dining with Gary Sikova, a rising tech mogul. Wendy, once discarded by Jacob for a younger woman, had reinvented herself, building a successful nonprofit and gaining respect. As Jacob's jealousy and need for control grew, his pursuit of revenge would unravel his world. In this tale of power, redemption, and second chances, Jacob realizes that true power is not about domination, but creation. A lesson he learns too late. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. The shadows of the past loom large, entangled in a game of power and redemption. A tale of second chances awaits, and I invite all lovers of drama to join us. Before we dive into this riveting story, I kindly ask for a favor. Subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support fuels the creation of exceptional content. The story begins with a man who seemed to have it all: a 9-figure fortune, a penthouse with breathtaking views of Madrid's Grand Villa, and a stunning younger woman at his side. Tonight, Jacob Maxwell was celebrating yet another successful acquisition, and he had chosen the exclusive LNX restaurant, a place so elite it felt like dining inside a vault of priceless treasures. But as his gaze swept across the room, he spotted a familiar figure. His past had just made a sudden, unwelcome appearance. His ex-wife Wendy, the woman he had cast aside for someone younger, was sitting at the prime table, and the man she was laughing with? None other than Gary Sikova, the tech mogul whose influence in the city now rivaled Jacob's own. In that instant, Jacob felt his world tilt. The predator had become the prey, his carefully curated world suddenly crumbling around him. The Maybach, silent and sleek, pulled up in front of LNX's discreet entrance. Alberto, the ever-stoic doorman who had served the elite for 2 decades, opened the door with practiced grace. Jacob Maxwell, a name synonymous with ruthless real estate empire building, stepped out first. He was a man carved from ambition, his suit a bespoke masterpiece from a tailor known only in the wealthiest circles. At 52, his confidence was as sharp as his appearance, his silver-streaked hair and piercing blue eyes exuding control. He extended a hand to his companion, Sophia Duran, whose beauty was equally striking. At 26, a former gallery assistant, she now graced Jacob's arm as his latest symbol of virility and power. Her dress, a vibrant crimson silk, clung to her sculpted form, honed by trainers and a lifestyle of green juices and champagne. Her laugh, light and musical, was just another asset she had cultivated for him. "Danny, this place is incredible," she exclaimed as they entered the opulent interior of LNX, which felt more like a private club for the elite than a public restaurant. The walls, adorned with oil paintings by Spanish masters, added a touch of grandeur, while the atmosphere hummed with the energy of power, money, and influence. The air smelled of expensive perfumes, and the clink of silverware on fine china filled the space. "Only the best for you, my dear," Jacob replied, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. He navigated the room with the assured stride of a man who felt at home among his peers, banking magnates and shipping tycoons. To them, he was both a rival and a partner, trapped in the gilded cage he had built for himself. Sophia, his current trophy, was a testament to his continued success. His thoughts briefly drifted to Wendy, his ex-wife and the mother of his 2 grown children, Helena and Javier. She had been there when the empire was still just a dream. Her quiet support had been crucial during the rocky beginnings of his rise to power. But as his wealth grew, so did his desires. Wendy, with her love of gardening and simple comforts, had become obsolete in his world. Their divorce had been a drawn-out affair, a battle of lawyers and pride. He had been generous, of course, bestowing her a grand estate in Toledo and a settlement that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. But he had stripped her of her dignity, parading his younger lovers as a reminder to the world, and to Wendy, that she was no longer important. For a time, it seemed like he had succeeded. His children reported that she was adjusting, but Jacob had never expected her to move on, especially not in a way that would threaten the world he had built. A sommelier arrived with a bottle of Vega Sicilia, presenting it as if it were a rare artifact. The wine, a deep garnet, was poured into Jacob's glass, the scent of black truffles and ripe plum filling the air. He sipped, savoring the perfect balance of flavors. "To us?" Jacob toasted, raising his glass to Sophia. "To us?" she repeated, her smile glowing in the candlelight. She was everything he wanted, a flawless companion, beautiful and obedient. She didn't know the man he once was, only the version he had carefully constructed. But then, his gaze swept across the room again. And that's when it happened. It was like a glitch in the Matrix, a disruption in his perfect world. At the corner table, bathed in soft lighting, was Wendy. But this was not the woman he remembered. Her once mousy brown hair was now a cascade of honey-blonde waves, her sapphire silk dress gleaming with understated elegance. She was not the broken, discarded figure he had left behind. She was radiant, full of life, and her laugh, genuine and full of joy, struck Jacob like a blow to the chest. He had expected her to fade away, to disappear into the quiet suburban life he had imagined for her. But instead she was thriving, and she wasn't alone. Across the table, Gary Sikova, the CEO of the booming tech firm Aura, was leaned in, hanging on every word she said. This was no casual meeting. This was intimacy, true, easy intimacy. Gary was not just listening to her, he was captivated by her. The jealousy that surged through Jacob was unlike anything he had ever felt before. The life he had envisioned for Wendy, lonely and forgotten, was not coming to pass. Instead, she was flourishing, and with a man who posed a direct challenge to his own dominance. Sophia noticed his gaze, the tension in the air palpable. "Is that Wendy?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Yes," Jacob replied, his voice tight. "She's different." Sophia didn't miss the hint of emotion in his voice. "What's going on, Danny? What's bothering you?" But Jacob couldn't pull himself away from the sight of Wendy and Gary, their quiet, shared moments sending a chill through his entire being. He had built his empire to be untouchable, but now, for the first time, he felt vulnerable. When Wendy stood, gracefully smoothing her dress, Jacob's heart clenched. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, a flicker of recognition, and then she turned her attention back to Gary. The distance between them had grown. She was no longer the woman who had loved him unconditionally. As they passed by Jacob's table, Gary acknowledged him with a calm, neutral nod, his voice cool and composed. "Maxwell," he said. Jacob nodded back, but the words caught in his throat. He had expected Wendy's return to be a blow, but it wasn't her transformation that devastated him. It was the fact that she had moved on, not just physically, but emotionally, with a man who represented the future, while he clung to the past. And so, as the evening wore on, Jacob Maxwell, once a king in his world, found himself confronting a truth he had never anticipated. The life he had so carefully built was beginning to slip from his grasp, and his ex-wife, the one he thought he had left behind, was now thriving in a new world, a world he wasn't ready to face. Then her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second towards Sophia, taking in the crimson dress, the youthful face, the whole tableau of his new life. A ghost of Asmile, enigmatic and faintly amused, touched her lips. "Jacob," she said, her voice as soft and cold as polished marble. It was the first time she had spoken his name in over 2 years. The sound of his name on her lips was both strange and painfully familiar. Then she turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and shattered assumptions in her wake. Gary Sikova gave Jacob one last long look, a look that was both a challenge and a dismissal before following her out. Jacob sat motionless in his booth, the remains of his due soul congealing on the plate in front of him. The king was still in his castle, but his walls had been breached. He looked at Sophia, but only saw a pale imitation of the woman who had just walked out of his life for the second time. "Well," Sophia said, breaking the heavy silence, her voice dripping with a newfound sarcasm. "That was educational," Jacob did not reply. He was staring at the door through which Wendy and Gary had disappeared, a cold, terrifying thought solidifying in his mind. He had not just lost a wife. He had lost a war he didn't even know he was fighting. And in Jacob Maxwell's world, losing was not an option. The fallen king's revenge, the shock was now hardening into something far more dangerous, a burning obsessive need for retribution. The ride back to Jacob's penthouse was a study in glacial silence. The opulent interior of the Maybach, usually a cocoon of comfort and luxury, felt like a tomb. Sophia stared out the window at the bright, indifferent city lights, while Jacob replayed the scene in their restaurant over and over in his mind, each time adding a new layer of humiliation and rage. Wendy's cold composure, Sikova's confident demeanor, the effortless intimacy between them. It was all a personal affront, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to mock him. He stormed into the penthouse, took off his jacket, and threw it onto a ridiculously expensive chaise longue. The apartment, a sprawling duplex with panoramic views of Rero Park, was his sanctuary, a monument to his success. But tonight, it felt empty. The vast vacant spaces echoed his own inner emptiness. "I need a drink," he announced to no one in particular. Heading to the marble-topped bar, he ignored the aged cognacs and single malt whizzies. Instead, he grabbed a bottle of vodka. He poured a generous measure into a crystal glass, foregoing the ceremony of ice or a mixer, and drank it in one fiery gulp. Sophia watched him from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. The sullen, petulant woman from the restaurant had been replaced by someone with a harder, more calculating edge. "So, are you going to tell me what that was all about?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Or are you just going to drink yourself into a stupor?" "It was nothing," Jacob growled, pouring himself another drink. "A chance encounter, it means nothing." "It didn't look like nothing, Danny," she retorted, stepping further into the room. "The way you looked at her, I've never seen you look at me like that. You look at me as if I'm a prize. You looked at her as if she was the one that got away." "Don't be ridiculous," he sneered, but the words lacked conviction. Sophia's observation was too close to the truth. "I don't need to know my life, my marriage. She has Gary Solar. You left her and she's with him. That's what's really eating at you, isn't it? It's not about her. It's about your ego. It's about him." Her words were a slap. A brutal and unwanted truth. He turned with eyes ablaze. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know anything about my life, my marriage. I know what I see." Sophia's voice was now a furious cry. "I see a man who thought he had it all. Who thought he could discard a woman like an old suit, and now he's having a complete meltdown because she dared to find happiness with someone else. Someone better." The word better was a poisoned dart. "Get out," Jacob said, his voice low and dangerous. "What?" "I said, get out," he roared, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. "Go back to your little apartment, which I pay for with the clothes I bought you, and leave me alone." Tears of rage and humiliation sprang into Sophia's eyes. She stared at him for a long moment, her beautiful face a mask of fury. "You know what, Jacob? For the first time, I actually feel sorry for her. She escaped. I'm just living in the prison she got out of." With that, she turned. She grabbed her purse from the counter and stormed out, slamming the door behind her with a resonant bang that seemed to shake the entire penthouse. Alone in the cavernous room, Jacob sank onto a leather sofa. The anger drained from him, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread. Sophia was right. His rage was fueled by a toxic cocktail of wounded pride, jealousy, and most terrifyingly, a immense sense of his own obsolescence. Sikova was the future. He was the past. Wendy's alliance with him felt like a definitive statement on his own relevance. His mind, conditioned for decades to treat every problem as a business challenge, immediately began to strategize. He needed information. He needed leverage. He needed to understand the dynamics of this new reality, so he could find a way to disrupt it. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It belonged to a man named Hector Vargas, a private investigator who operated in the gray areas of the law, a specialist in digging up the kind of dirt that could ruin reputations and bring down empires. "Vargas," a husky voice answered on the second ring. "It's Maxwell." There was a slight pause. "Jacob, it's been a long time. I trust you're not calling to reminisce. I need information, Hector, on two people. My ex-wife, Wendy Maxwell, though she may be using her maiden name, Ramos, and a man named Gary Sikova. Sikova of Aura." Vargas sounded intrigued. "Flying high these days. What do you want to know?" "Everything," Jacob said, his voice a low growl. "Their relationship, how they met, how long they've been seeing each other, his financials, his business, any vulnerabilities, and her. I want to know what she's been doing for the last 2 years. Every detail. I want to know who her friends are, where she goes, what she does. I want to know her." He wanted to understand the woman she had become, the woman who had captivated a man like Solar. He needed to find the weak spot in her armor, the weakness he could exploit. "That's a deep dive, Jacob. It'll be expensive." "I don't care about the cost," Jacob said, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. "I want it done, and I want it done in silence. You know me, Jacob. Silence is my middle name." After hanging up, Jacob felt a sliver of his old control return. He was acting, taking the initiative. But as he looked out at the sprawling city, a new, unsettling thought began to form. Why was Sikova interested in Wendy? A man like him could have any woman he wanted, models, actresses, socialites. Why choose a divorced woman in her late 40s? A woman Jacob himself had deemed unworthy. Was it possible there was more to this than a simple romance? Was Sikova using her somehow? The thought was both repulsive and strangely comforting. If Wendy was a pawn in a bigger game, it would make sense. It would restore the order of his world. But then another, more insidious thought crept in. What if Solar wasn't using her at all? What if he saw in Wendy the same things Jacob had overlooked or scorned? Her intelligence, her quiet strength, her integrity. What if in his blind arrogance he had thrown away a diamond, only to see it picked up and polished by a more discerning eye? The thread of his neatly ordered life had been severed, and as Jacob sat alone in his gilded cage, he could feel the entire tapestry beginning to unravel. The investigation into Wendy and Solar was no longer just about gathering information. It was about finding a way to knit his world back together, even if it meant tearing theirs apart. The final gambit. A week later, an unmarked manila envelope arrived at Jacob's private office. Inside was a thin USB drive and a single sheet of paper with a typed message. First delivery, HV. Jacob dismissed his secretary for the day, locked his office door, and slid the drive into his laptop. The screen filled with files, surveillance photos, financial reports, and a detailed summary from Hector Vargas. He clicked on the summary, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. The report began with Wendy. After the divorce, she had not crumbled as he expected. Instead, she had undergone a quiet, determined metamorphosis. She had sold the Toledo estate, a move that surprised Jacob. He had seen it as her gilded cage, her consolation prize, but she had clearly seen it as a tether to a past she wanted to sever. With a portion of the settlement money, she had established a non-profit foundation dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship for underprivileged young women in STEM fields. The report detailed how Wendy had personally overseen every aspect of the foundation's creation, from writing the bylaws to interviewing the first round of scholarship recipients. She had leveraged her old contacts from her pre-marriage career in university administration and had quickly built a small but respected organization. The photos Vargas had included were not of a lonely, heartbroken woman. They showed Wendy in boardrooms at charity events, speaking at a university podium. She looked poised, engaged, and full of purpose. The sapphire dress at Elenex was not an anomaly. It was her new uniform. Then came the part he was truly waiting for: her connection to Gary Solar. They had not met at a gala or a society party. They had met at a technology conference, where Wendy had been a guest speaker presenting on the importance of diversity in tech innovation. Sakova had been in the audience. According to Vargas's sources, he had been so immersed by her speech and the work of her foundation that he had approached her afterward. Their first date had been a tour of her foundation's office, followed by a quiet dinner. Their relationship, Vargas wrote, had developed slowly and organically over the past 8 months. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared interests. Sakova was a major donor to her foundation, but his involvement was more than just financial. He served as an informal advisor, connecting her with influential figures in the tech world, and providing mentorship to her scholarship students. Jacob felt a sour taste in his mouth. This was not a sordid affair or a cynical power play. It was a partnership. Sakova wasn't just attracted to Wendy's newfound glamour. He was attracted to her mind, her passion, her purpose, the very qualities Jacob had come to find so domestic and unexciting. He turned his attention to Solar's files. The financials were, as expected, astronomical. Aura was a juggernaut. Its stock price seemed to defy gravity. But Vargas had dug past the public records and into the murkier waters of Solar's business. And there he had found something interesting. Aura was in the final stages of a high-stakes secret negotiation to acquire a smaller but incredibly innovative robotics company called Kinetic Dynamics. The deal was worth billions and would solidify Aura's dominance in the AI and robotics space for the next decade. Kinetic Dynamics held key patents that would be revolutionary if integrated with Aura's AI platform. The acquisition was Solar's passion project, the cornerstone of his long-term strategy. Jacob leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. He knew Kinetic Dynamics. In fact, a subsidiary of Maxwell Properties held a significant, though non-controlling stake in the company. It was a legacy investment he hadn't paid much attention to in recent years, but now it was a weapon. A cold, brilliant idea began to form in his mind. As a major shareholder, he could potentially derail the acquisition. He could raise objections, demand a higher price, rally other shareholders, and bog the deal down in a quagmire of legal and financial complications. He could make Solar's life a living hell. He could bleed him dry, distract him, and maybe even kill the deal altogether. It would be a devastating blow to Oran, to Solar personally. It was the perfect revenge. It was not a direct attack on Wendy, which would be messy and could backfire, making him look petty. This was business. It was a move on the corporate battlefield, a world he understood and dominated. He would hit Solar, where he was most vulnerable: his ambition, his legacy. And Wendy, as Solar's partner, would be caught in the crossfire. Her newfound happiness would be inextricably linked to the fortunes of a man he was about to bring to his knees. The plan was audacious, ruthless, and deeply satisfying. It restored his sense of control, his belief in his own power. He was no longer the passive, humiliated observer in the restaurant. He was Jacob Maxwell, the puppet master, and he was about to start pulling the strings. He picked up the phone and dialed his head of corporate strategy. "David," he said, his voice hard as steel, "I want you to pull everything we have on a company called Kinetic Dynamics. I want a full breakdown of our shareholder rights and a list of all other major investors. We're going to war." The decision settled a sense of calm over him, but as he looked at Wendy's photo on his screen, smiling, confident, standing at a podium, a flicker of doubt pricked his conscience. The woman in the photo was a stranger to him, but she was also the mother of his children. The woman who had once shared his dreams. Was Hetrally prepared to destroy her newfound happiness just to soothe his wounded ego? He dismissed the thought. This was no longer about feelings. It was about power. In his world there were winners and losers, and Jacob Maxwell never lost. He closed the laptop, Wendy and Solar's faces temporarily hidden from view. The game had begun, and he was sure he had just found his checkmate. A checkmate of a different kind. The boardroom of Maxwell Properties was Jacob's sanctuary of power, his modern-day throne room. It was a space meticulously designed to intimidate. The 20-foot-long table, carved from a single piece of rare Brazilian mahogany, gleamed under a constellation of custom-designed recessed lights. The glass wall behind his chair didn't just offer a view. It presented the city Ashes domain, a sprawling map of his conquests. Before Gary Solar arrived, Jacob paced the room like a caged panther, adjusting the position of a watercarf by a millimeter, ensuring the leather folder in front of his chair was perfectly aligned. He wasn't just preparing for a meeting. He was setting a stage for an execution. His legal team had assured him that his position was airtight. The motion to block the sale of Kinetic Dynamics to Aura was a masterpiece of corporate legal jargon filled with plausible deniability and seemingly sound financial reasoning. It was a declaration of war disguised as prudent business. In his mind, the scenario was clear. So would arrive angry and blustering. Jacob would remain calm, imperious, a stone wall of corporate procedure. He would watch the tech prodigy, the man who had stolen his past, slowly realize that he was out of his depth, tangled in a game whose rules were written by old money and ruthless ambition. Jacob craved that moment of dawning fear in Solar's eyes. It was a hunger that had gnawed at him for a week when his private secretary announced Solar's arrival. Jacob took a deep breath, sat down in his high-backed leather chair and interlaced his fingers, the very picture of untouchable authority. Gary Sikova entered the room alone. There was no entourage of lawyers or assistants. He wore a simple, exquisitely tailored dark gray suit, a stark contrast to Jacob's power stripes. He carried a slim leather portfolio and moved with an unhurried grace. There was a silent statement of self-confidence. His presence didn't alter the power dynamic of the room. He simply ignored it. He was not a supplicant entering a king's court. He was an equal. He walked to the far end of the long table and paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the panoramic view before turning to Jacob. An impressive view. "Jacob," Solar began, his voice quiet and resonant, easily filling the cavernous space. The use of his first name was a subtle but effective check to the room's intended intimidation. "It's easy to feel like a god from up here, but you have to be careful. Heights can make you forget what happens on the ground." Jacob bristled at the veiled condescension. "I'm a busy man, Solar. I appreciate the architectural commentary, but my time is valuable. I assume you're here about Kinetic Dynamics." "That's right," Solar replied, taking a seat. He didn't wait to be invited. "Your motion to block the acquisition is creative. A lot of impressive legal jargon to say you want to cause trouble. I have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders of my company." Jacob recited the words, feeling hollow even to himself. "Your offer for Kinetic, while superficially attractive, undervalues the company's long-term patent portfolio. I believe a more competitive bidding process would yield a greater return for everyone. It's just business." So met his gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "Let's not insult each other's intelligence, Jacob. This isn't about business, and we both know it. You've held that non-controlling stake in Kinetic for 12 years, and you haven't attended a single shareholder meeting. Your own analysts recommended divesting 2 years ago. Your sudden, passionate concern for its patent portfolio appeared exactly 48 hours after you saw me having dinner with Wendy. The frankness of the attack was unnerving. Jacob had expected a dance, a series of feints and parries. Sikova had simply walked to the center of the ring and thrown a punch. "This has nothing to do with my ex-wife," Jacob snapped, his voice a low growl. "And I'd advise you to leave her out of this conversation." "I can't," Sikova said, his voice losing its lightness and taking on the hardness of forged steel. "Because she is the reason for this entire conversation. You saw her happy. You saw her empowered. And you couldn't stand it. You couldn't attack her directly. That would look petty even for you. So you came after me using your shares in Kinetic as a club. You're willing to sabotage a billion-dollar deal that is crucial to the future of technology. A deal that ironically would significantly increase the value of your own investment. All to soothe your pathetic wounded ego. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, piercing Jacob's carefully constructed armor of self-importance. You're arrogant and presumptuous. Jacob spat, his face flushed. You walk into my city, my world, and you think you understand me. You think you understand the woman I was married to for 25 years. No, Solar conceded, leaning forward. I don't pretend to understand the man you are. But I have spent the last 8 months getting to know the woman you threw away. I know she's brilliant. I know she's resilient. And I know she's a better strategist than you are. You underestimated her then, and you're making the grave mistake of underestimating her now. You see, you think this is your game, your table. He gestured to the mahogany expanse between them. You're wrong. You've been playing her game since the moment you walked into that restaurant. He reached into his portfolio, pulled out the slim leather folder, and slid it with deliberate slowness across the vast polished surface. It stopped directly in front of Jacob. Before you detonate this grenade you've built, I thought you should see the blast radius. I thought you should see the board. With trembling hands, Jacob opened the portfolio. The title page read, The Ramos Innovation Center, a proposal for the development of the Westlands. His blood ran cold. The Westlands, the sprawling 16-acre parcel of post-industrial land that was supposed to be his magnum opus, his flagship project. He had spent millions on lobbyists, architects, and backroom deals trying to secure it. The bidding process had been secretive, brutal, and he had been certain that his final offer submitted last month was unbeatable. He flipped through their pages, his horror mounting with each one. He saw architectural renderings of a stunning state-of-the-art campus, a harmonious blend of glass, steel, and green spaces. He saw a detailed business proposal that was nothing short of visionary. This wasn't just another soulless glass tower of luxury condominiums. It was a symbiotic ecosystem, a partnership between Wendy's nonprofit foundation and a commercial tech incubator. The plan promised thousands of high-paying jobs, educational partnerships with the city's universities, and public community spaces. It was a developer's dream and a politician's fantasy. How? He finally whispered, looking at Solar, his mind reeling. The bidding was sealed. My offer was immense. Your offer was about money. Solar explained, his voice patient like a teacher explaining a complex problem to a slow student. Wendy's offer was about value. She knew you wanted that land. She's been listening to you talk about it for a decade. She knew your plan was to build another monument to yourself, another sterile enclave for the global elite. So she spent a year working in silence on a better idea. He detailed the strategy with surgical precision. Wendy had leveraged her foundation's stellar reputation and her own academic contacts. She had met personally with the community boards, listening to their concerns. She had courted the city council members Jacob had tried to intimidate. She presented them not with a pile of cash, but with a vision for the city's future, a future of innovation, not just empty real estate. The mayor had called her proposal the most exciting urban development project of the 21st century. While you were focused on your hostile takeovers and your trophy girlfriends, Wendy was changing the city. Solar continued, twisting the knife. The development rights for the Westlands were awarded to the Ramos Foundation 2 weeks ago. The announcement is pending. Jacob felt the air leave his lungs. He had been so engrossed in his petty act of revenge against Sikova that he had missed the main event. He had been setting a trap for a rabbit, oblivious to the fact that a pack of wolves was surrounding him. And here's the master stroke, Jacob, Solar said, leaning in for the final fatal blow. What do you think is the anchor tenant for the commercial wing of the Ramos Center? The flagship company that will draw in other innovators and validate the entire project. He paused, letting the silence stretch. It's kinetic dynamics. Its main robotics lab will occupy the 3 central buildings. The entire financial model of the Ramos Center, Wendy's entire vision, is predicated on my acquisition of Kinetic being successful. The deal is symbiotic. The 2 projects are inextricably linked. The trap was sprung. The genius of it was breathtaking in its cruelty. If he continued his attack on Solar's acquisition, he wouldn't just be a bitter corporate raider. He would be the man who personally, publicly, and maliciously destroyed his ex-wife's life's work, the mother of his children. He would be torpedoing a project beloved by the city, confirming every caricature of him as a greedy, destructive dinosaur. He wouldn't just lose the deal. He would lose everything. His public reputation, what little respect his children had for him, his entire legacy. He was in checkmate, total and complete. He looked at the documents, the elegant building that bore the name Ramos, a name she had reclaimed, A name now synonymous with vision and progress. What do you want? Jacob asked, his voice a rasping sound he barely recognized as his own. The bravado, the anger, the arrogance. It had all evaporated, leaving only the cold, raw reality of his defeat. It's simple, Solar said, his voice now devoid of malice, retaining only the calm of absolute victory. You will call your lawyers, and you will withdraw the motion against the kinetic acquisition unconditionally. Then you'll leave. The Westlands are no longer your problem. The Ramos Center is no longer your problem. And Wendy is no longer your problem. Jacob remained motionless for what felt like an eternity. The city lights began to gleam in the twilight outside his window. No longer symbols of his kingdom, but small mocking eyes. He thought of Wendy, not the mousy woman he remembered, but the force of nature who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. He had tried to put her in a box, and she had responded by redesigning the entire city's skyline. Finally, with a slow, crushing exhale, he nodded with a single, almost imperceptible movement. Fine. The word was the epitaph of his reign. Solar stood up, his objective accomplished. He gathered his portfolio, his movements crisp and efficient. He walked to the door, but paused with his hand on the knob, turning to face the broken man at the head of the table. You know, Jacob, in all the time I've known Wendy, I've never heard her speak ill of you, he said. His voice softened with something that might have been pity. She talks about your early years, about the ambition she once admired. She says you gave her 2 wonderful children, Helena and Javier, and that they are the best part of both of you. They, incidentally, are on the Foundation's junior board. They are immensely proud of what their mother is building. He let that last detail sink in. She found her own purpose, Jacob. I sincerely suggest you try to find one for yourself. The door closed with a click, the sound echoing in the cavernous, silent boardroom. Jacob remained in his chair, a solitary figure dwarfed by the symbols of his own empty empire. The city gleamed indifferently. He had sought to orchestrate a drama of power and revenge, but instead he had been cast as the tragic, obsolete fool in a story of rebirth and triumph. He was Jacob Maxwell, the man who had it all, and he had never felt so poor. A meaningful ending. The consequences of that day in the boardroom were not loud, but they were seismic. Jacob, humbled and broken, withdrew his opposition to the kinetic dynamic steel. The acquisition went through, and the announcement of the Ramos Innovation Center was met with citywide acclaim. Wendy, no longer a ghost of the past, became a celebrated figure. A philanthropist and visionary in her own right, Jacob's name was never publicly connected to the failed land bid. His defeat was a private, deeply personal humiliation. He and Sophia parted ways. The illusion of their glamorous life shattered beyond repair. He was left in his penthouse, a king in a kingdom of one, forced to watch the woman he had discarded build a new world without him. He had sought a dramatic confrontation, a way to reclaim his power. But he discovered that true power is not about control, but about creation. Wendy and Gary didn't just win. They built something better.